to the Solomon Islands. And back in 2018 now, I had just this fabulous opportunity to take a group of 17 people to the Solomon Islands. We went via Australia. So I'm just going to show you actually where the Solomon Islands are, in case you don't know. So if we're all the way up the top here, just below where it says Sweden, all around the corner. And the Solomon Islands are just east of Papua New Guinea. So actually what we did on this tour, we actually flew all the way across to Brisbane, and we went up into the rainforest area, about an hour outside of, hour and a half outside of Brisbane, where we spent 3 or 4 days just accommodating to the time zone and the temperature, and got to see some nice Australian rainforest birds before we then flew 3 hours north east from Brisbane to the Solomon Islands. And the tour very much was, again, it was with Chaz, who was very much with Sarah in Komodo and Bali. And Chaz is very much a cetologist, really, sort of studying cetaceans, whales and dolphins. And so the idea of the Solomon Islands trip was to really focus on the sea life, but still have visits to the islands as well, but not too far off from you can just see the Solomon Islands here up in the top right, not too far off the coastline, really, round here, just south of where it says Solomon Islands. The sea drops away to deeper water. And of course, where you get deeper water, you get lots of nutrients coming up from the deep, providing lots of food for plankton, zooplankton, and then in turn providing food for the fishes, and then food for the cetaceans, the whales and dolphins. So on our particular trip, we flew into Honiara, which is on the Guadalcanal Island over here, and we did a lovely circumnavigation, really, to the west, all the way over towards Georgia Island, but just peeking out a little bit into these deeper waters, which were going to be very good for whales and dolphins. And in particular, we were on the lookout for a very unknown whale, really, called the Amura's whale, which was only properly named as a species in 2000, just checking my notes here, in 2003. But actually it had been spotted before then, but not necessarily identified. I shall tell you more about that in a short while. We were staying on the Bibikiki, which actually is sort of a dive boat, a little bit like what Sarah was on in Bali and Komodo, but very much suited to our needs. The rooms were air conditioned, which was fabulous because it was very tropical heat, very hot heat sometimes. We were graced always with bowls of lovely hot popcorn with salt to keep our mineral levels up. But if we wanted to cool off, then we had the air-conditioned rooms below, which of course was late. But this was a lovely boat. We had a great crew, a local crew, so all from some of the local different islands, using local foods, which I'll show you in a moment. And we went out each day on the tinny boats. So we had 2 of these to take us out and to get us into the nooks and crannies and get us onto land, really, to see things a bit closer. And we had a very similar itinerary to Sarah, really, in terms of we usually had a morning and an afternoon snorkel, very similar sorts of timings, really, and using the tinnies to go out and go snorkeling. And of course, we had some beautiful, beautiful sunsets as well. This was on one of our first days where we were just getting to know each other with some beautiful food. I'll show you some of the food in a moment. And just watching the sun go down across the islands, it really was amazing. And I think for me, I mean, when you look up the Solomon Islands, it's quite mysterious. You really don't quite know what it's going to be like when you land. You look on Google Maps, but, you know, it's off the beaten track, so the quality of the images on Google Maps are not that detailed. So it was really intriguing to know what's it going to be like when we arrive, what's it going to look like, what are the people going to be like, etc. And so it was really fantastic just getting a sense of that, and going to meet some indigenous people that were living on the islands, which I'll come to right at the very end. But it really was amazing going to a part of the world that we know very little about, that we hear very little about, and there's very little information online. And although a lot of Australians do go to Solomon Islands to holiday, it's generally, still off the beaten track. So many of the reefs, or all of the reefs pretty much, are untouched. They're not broken from diving or people, tourists. They're very much untouched and clean reef beds, which of course was Very much what a lot of the tour was about, actually. It was about both watching whales and dolphins, but also snorkeling and seeing the underwater life. And again, these beautiful colours, being close to the equator, and the long, wonderful, drawn out colours here before it got dark at around 6 p.m. So we had some beautiful food on board as well. Again, catered really well for various different kind of eaters and diets, and depending on what you were able to eat and not eat, they really dealt with that very well. And just again, very beautiful, colourful food, looking local foods, and it looked good, it tastes good, and there was just a really nice variety each day to keep us going. And also the time just to relax as well. We were spending a lot of time on deck, a little bit like on Sarah's boat, where we were up on deck doing lots of watching. But if the sun became a bit too unbearable, we were able to just relax and chill, and still be able to see out to sea on the lower deck. And even on the boat itself, particularly if you're interested in moths, there were still some moths attracted to some of the lights on the boat at night. So we got to see all sorts of tropical moths. I mean, look how big this one is. This was a huge, big moth on someone's palm here. So it was a really good opportunity to actually also do a little bit of mothing if that's of your interest. With a lot of these being, we were often moored just off some of the little islands, so these moths were probably just coming off from those islands each time. But for me, one of the really special things about the Solomon Islands was meeting people, was seeing the local people and getting understanding of their lives. They're living on very low-lying islands. They're very vulnerable to our changing climate and increasing sea level rises, but living very basic lives. They were coming to us on these very basic dugout canoes. Most of them are not wearing shoes. They've got these amazing feet because they're not wearing, their toes and feet are not confined into shoes, and just very beautiful, wonderful, friendly people. And as I say, the crew were from many of these villages as well, so they had a real connection with the people in that way. And the boat, the Bilakiki, has this arrangement with local people to meet with them every so often. I think it's every 10 days, to be able to buy a lot of their local produce. And so this is what we were doing. And this produce was being bought. We bought pretty much most of this, and it was then being used in the cooking and our food each day, which was wonderful, really, and a great, it really felt like a sustainable way of supporting the communities who were out there and obviously growing these foods. And look at the color of these tomatoes and these peppers, and this was then being put into our food. It was wonderful. And this is what the terrain looked like, really. It was great going somewhere where you didn't just see palm trees, or you didn't just see exposed rot from deforestation. We were seeing, very much intact islands. Now, of course, there is some forestry in places, and we did certainly see palm trees and coconut trees on some islands, but it was really great to see this very natural forest woodland on most of the islands, and certainly not seeing the sort of destruction that you might see in other parts of the world. And you've got these coral, limestone, fossil rich islands, basically, that are kind of being pushed up gradually. The sea levels have gone down, or the islands have been pushed up over time, now always treed up. And we'd often be seeing things like Solomon's cockatoo, which is unique to the Solomon Islands, flying around and calling. But of course, the beauty was actually in what was below the water twice a day for us. And it doesn't matter whether you're a good snorkeler or not, there was lots of support to be able to enable you to go in. And we had some people that were perhaps a little bit less sure about snorkeling, but the two guides we had were dive instructors and very good at providing support. I've also been a dive instructor, sort of teacher trainer myself when I used to dive, so I was able to offer support as well and give people the opportunity to look underwater and experience what was there, and just to take it all in. And like in Indonesia and where Sarah was, you don't have to go very far beneath the water to see the colors and to see the variety of wildlife. Here we've got some wonderful clownfish here, the kind of typical Nemo fish, associating with the anemones, which don't cause any sort of stinging sensation to the fish, as far as we know. Beautiful corals and brain corals and all sorts of other things with beautiful kind of fish. And we saw, just checking my details, so we saw 130 species at least of tropical fish. And it was really exciting. Kind of in the evening time after dinner, there was a group who were particularly keen to try and identify everything. And we were going through our photographs and trying to work out what they are. And of course, over this 2 weeks or so, really getting to grips with what some of these different species were. This was my favorite, actually. This was a batfish. I got a beautiful wooden ornament, which we were allowed to bring back through customs through Australia, which was made out of local wood of a batfish, and a really fabulous, quite friendly fish in this case. We saw a number of these on occasion. But these are just some of the views, really looking into the cabins. And some nights, some days we saw black tipped reef sharks. Other days we were just looking at lots of beautiful, colorful fish, like these blue ones here. Just, this must have been probably only a half a meter or a meter just under the surface, really. So just beautiful views. This is in the Mbulu Canyon. And we got to visit all these different kind of dive sites, really, where normally people would be scuba diving. But to be honest, really, we were getting to see as much beauty just by snorkeling. This is a blue sea star, which we saw lots of. And the colors don't really do it justice. It's one of those things where once you get a few meters under the water, you kind of lose some of the colors, really. But with the naked eye, with your face mask on, these were really just pristine, unbroken, species rich coral reefs. They were just a marvel to see each day. Here we've got a special kind of clam here with its beautiful sort of fleshy kind of edges just along here in amongst the coral. Another sea anemone with the clownfish, and this beautiful red and black anemone fish. Isn't that stunning? Just beautiful. And it was just brilliant to see these. We saw about half a dozen species of anemone fish. And, I hadn't realized there were quite so many. It was just really wonderful to sort of see them so well and see them in different areas over the course of the journey. And this here, so well camouflaged, is fabulous clouded lizardfish, looking very cryptic against the colors of the coral here. And these feather stars, which occasionally you sometimes saw actually swimming in the water. They take themselves off the coral and actually go for a little swim. And you can see their kind of undulating arms and appendages as they're floating through the water, which is quite interesting to see. But of course, one of the reasons we were there actually were to see the whales and dolphins. And in between the snorkeling, when we were moving between locations, we had the opportunity. And just like in Komodo and Bali, we had the opportunity to see, well, in this case, we actually saw, just checking my notes here, 16 species. I mean, like Sarah, I've been to the Azores, I've been to Monterey Bay, I've been to some fabulous whale and dolphin sites, but to see 16 different species of whale and dolphin was mind-blowing. I mean, I just couldn't believe it, that every day we were going to a different place and seeing, and it just gave you an indication of the food and the richness of these species, and what else is further down the food chain. So here we've actually got some pygmy killer whales just coming out with their little white lips as they're coming out of the water here. We've got short fin pilot whales, which perhaps some of you might be more familiar with. These are certainly species you'll also get in places such as the Azores, for example, coming out of the water. But look at the crystal blue color of the water in the sea here. It's absolutely beautiful. Here we've got some pan-tropical spotted dolphins. Usually when you see them up close, you can see it's almost like someone's had a pepper grinder and you've got all these little tiny black spots, but you can't see that so well on these particular animals. But just beautiful, clear blue water. Another one just coming out here. And one of my favorites, because they actually look quite prehistoric, these are ruffed-toothed dolphins, and they've got quite a sort of sloping forehead, and they almost look a little bit like an ichthyosaur, like an ancient sea dragon that would have been alive about 200 million years ago. But these, of course, today, modern-day dolphins, quite happily swimming. And we got to, sometimes if you went snorkeling with the dolphins in the water, you could hear their squeaks and their clicks. Here's another couple of rough-toothed dolphins with this lovely still bit of seaweed and crystal blue water. But again, you can see how they look quite almost sea dragon-like with that profile, ideally suited for swimming under the water. One of the big reasons for being out in the Solomon Islands was to try and find a whale, really, which was unknown to the Solomon Islands, certainly since 1976. And as I say, had only been named as the Amura's whale in 2003. And this whale we're looking at here is the Brooder's whale, the bride's whale, which you might see if you've been to New Zealand, you might see if you've been to the Azores, perhaps to Madeira, they're certainly found across a wide band of the tropics. And if you get to see the top of their head, the kind of rostrum area, which is the big kind of top of the mouth and head area, they've got three ridges, one that's kind of in the center and one that goes on either side. And so we were looking for a similar sort of whale, similar size tropical whale, but only had one line, one ridge along the top of the rostrum, and perhaps a more mottled kind of patterned skin. And that's what we were looking for. So we certainly saw the brood as well of this one here, you can see here. And then finally, after days of watching and towards the end of the tour, we got to see this wonderful mother and calf Amura's whale. And these were the first confirmed sightings of the actual species since 1976. Now, of course, I am sure that the local people probably see these every day and have probably seen them very regularly. But from a science perspective, in terms of actually, identifying this animal and being able to log it from a scientific and conservation perspective, we were seeing the first confirmed Amura's whale since 1976. The first specimens had actually been logged 42 years ago by Japanese whalers who killed, I think, about half a dozen and actually had measured them and actually logged the details in their logbooks. But of course, at that point, they hadn't been identified as a different species. It's only now when Chaz and other people have been, and Japanese scientists have looked back at this data, they've realized that actually these were Amura's whales. So we were so pleased to, after seeing all these whales and dolphins, to finally see the Amura's whale actually here in the Solomon Islands and confirm its identity, which was really quite remarkable. And here's mum and the calf going under. You can't quite see. I did have some video footage, but it wasn't working very well with the internet connection, so I haven't been able to include it. But you have to take my word for it that when you did see the top of the head, you could just see that single ridge. And Chaz and some people were much closer at the back of the boat and could certainly see this kind of swirling, kind of mottled skin of these Amura's whales. So they are a baleen whale. They are like a sort of miniature fin whale or blue whale. They have the baleen coming down from the top of their mouth to be able to gulp water and gulp lots of small crustaceans and fishes at the same time. So we achieved our aim there of seeing the Amura's whale alongside all these other wonderful whales and dolphins. And in the final few minutes, I just want to finish off with the people side of it, because of course, when you're going around these islands, it's really important to consider the people, the fact that, the respect really of going around their islands and their places. And towards the end of the tour, we saw the Amura's whale very close to this particular island and village, which we stopped off at. And this is the island of Coromolum. And we got to explore a couple of villages, this one and another place where we were able to, one of our boat people actually got to show us his house and his home, meet his villagers. But this particular one, we got to actually be shown around. And for me, actually, what was really special was that they, I guess for visitors, they do some of their local traditional dance, but there was something very poignant about it, something very special about it that when I was listening to it brought a real tear to my eye. It was really amazing to watch and to feel welcome in this way. And I just want to play you some sound, which hopefully is going to come through okay. This is of the women actually singing, and the next slide I'll play some of the actual music. Oh, let me just go back there again and just play that again. I just clicked on the thing there. And the young men were actually playing these tubes with their flip-flops of all things, actually. But it was a real village experience. Everybody coming out. We were there, being entertained, but also interacting with the people and seeing their kind of local tradition. And it really was a wonderful event. Here's the sound. And so, it's wonderful listening to that music all over again. It was a very happy experience. It felt like a very sort of positive experience, really. And again, um, just feeling like, we were supporting the community and helping to support what they are doing on those islands, really. And as I say, very vulnerable to the changes that are going on environmentally. So I'd say, as part of this trip, it was fantastic seeing all the whales and dolphins. It was wonderful doing all the snorkeling. But a really important part of it, I think, for all of us was to actually meet real people living out there, to interact with them, not just be an observer, but to actually be, you know, meeting them, talking to them, and listening to that music was just absolutely wonderful and very memorable trip. And I hope you could hear the sound there without it sort of blasting too loud. I think it was perhaps a bit quieter than it ought to have been there, but hopefully you could hear it okay. And a final image there, just of the sunset going down behind one of the islands there, and actually showing you some palm trees there on one of the small islands. But I just can't get across how amazing it was just being in, a very remote part of the world where you felt that, technology and the kind of modern pressures of the world were actually quite remote, a long way away. And it was just quite humbling, really, to be able to explore the Solomon Islands, to meet these people, and just get a sense, really, of how these parts of the world are, and actually what the wildlife is like there. And it just shows you by seeing 16 species of whale and dolphin, just how rich those waters are there. So I hope you enjoyed that whistle top tour there of the Solomon Islands, and very much kind of complementing the trip that Sarah was illustrating there in the Komodo and the Bali Islands as well. Thank you.